Thank you to the patrons for supporting the channel.
Uh-oh. Bye-bye.
Welcome back. Today, as voted on by my patrons, we're taking an in-depth look at Petscop. I am really excited for this, not just because it's really well done and interesting, but also because not a lot of people have seen through Petscop all the way to the end. Of course, Pyrocynical is the most memed one, how he stopped after one video, but not a lot of people came back to it after its first hiatus to see what the story was now that it's finished. But that's what we're doing today. I've also found a lot of people shy away from trying to give an explicit story that is being told here and tend to talk more about the themes and the metaphors, which obviously I think are very interesting, but I think there's too many dates and names and specific events for me to be able to write it off as all metaphorical. There's definitely a physical timeline of events, a physical story that is taking place here. So I'm gonna at least be attempting to tell a cohesive story here. I also do want to talk about the themes and some interesting metaphors that I think exist in it, so really we're covering all of the bases, I hope. So buckle up.
Bye-bye. Uh-oh. Bye-bye. Uh-oh. Bye-bye.
If you're at all interested in seeing the process of researching something as big as Petscop, you can check out my stream highlights video on my second channel where I watched Petscop with you guys and took some notes. It was a lot of fun. And if you want to catch the next stream, you can follow my Twitter because that's where I let y'all know when I'm streaming. Alright, with all that out of the way, let's start talking about Petscop, starting with some background and the context in which it was made. Petscop's first video is simply titled Petscop and was uploaded on March 12th, 2017. All of the videos from here on would just simply be titled Petscop and then another number, until the final video in September of 2019. Yeah, this series went on for a while. Petscop's premise is not unique on the surface. It appears at first to be your classic "this weird game I found" creepypasta like Ben Drown or Sonic EXE. In fact, the creator Tony Domenico has referenced before his inspiration from the likes of Ben Drown. Paul, the protagonist, records himself playing a strange, unfinished PlayStation 1 game, and creepiness ensues. While it does far exceed the likes of EXE creepypastas, it doesn't just leave these influences behind. It uses them to its advantage to play with your expectations. You're constantly waiting for the jump scare, the blood, the creepy face appearing for one frame. It's what you've grown to expect from the genre, and it never comes. It's just subtle dread all the way through. And this isn't in spite of nothing spooky popping out, but because of it, at least in part. The expectation of the genre keeps you on the edge of your seat, filling you with tension as you wait for a jump scare that never comes. Each second that passes where it doesn't, the tension grows as the next second could be the one that they throw something at you. This isn't to say it's boring or there's no payoff. The story is intriguing, and solving certain mysteries and puzzles takes the place of a jump scare. But the important thing to note is its use of your expectations in the genre. Another genre Petscop is closely related to, and of course overlaps quite a bit with the previous, is the ARG format. Technically, the correct term for Petscop would be unfiction or a web series. Because the audience doesn't actively affect the story, there isn't a game aspect to an alternate reality game. An actual ARG would be something like The Sun Vanished, where audience choice was directly a factor. There isn't anything like that in Petscop, but while you're watching, it feels like the story is asking something of you. So much so that at one point, a completely unrelated website was getting spammed with emails because people were sure that this is where the interaction began. But no, the story is the way it is no matter what. Instead, our protagonist protagonist, Paul, is the one interacting with the game, solving the puzzles, which is one of the reasons I think a lot of people tend to look at the story in the wrong way. The story is about Paul. It's not necessarily about the game itself, although the two do intertwine. But it's important to note that Paul is our protagonist, and the story we are piecing together is his journey through discovering this other story that's inside Petscop. It's also important to note that, according to the creator, there are a lot of details, possibly very important ones, that are left out of the videos on purpose. He included what would feasibly make sense for us to see. The purpose of Petscop was to create a creepy experience, not have a story that people could perfectly solve. That means a couple things. When making theories about what this story means, the themes it explores and such, well, there's some wiggle room because we don't have all the information, and that's on purpose. It's meant to be interpreted. There's also an issue of author's intent versus reader's interpretation. Whether or not an author or creator intended something in a work, it doesn't mean the work itself doesn't contain valid interpretations of certain themes or ideas. Especially in such an open-ended story like Petscop, it's important to note that the reader's interpretation can be just as valid as an analysis of the work as what Tony Domenico actually intended. Okay, final thing. I have done days of research and taken tons of notes on this topic, but inevitably, I'm sure somewhere along the line I will mess something up, state a theory that's been disproven, or something along those lines. That just comes with the territory of covering something like Petscop. If there's better explanations for certain things I leave out in this, please leave a comment. I'll probably be checking around because this series is so great and I'd love to hear what other people think about it. I'm also sure that many times during the creation of this video I will think to myself, damn it, I should have talked about this. I'm sure it will happen while I'm writing the script, while I'm editing, right after I'm done exporting the video, right after I upload it, and then weeks later after it's uploaded. I'm going to try my best to cover everything here, but if I think of something really important, I might update my Twitter about it or something. Okay, with all of that out of the way, let's break down Petscop 1 to 24. Okay, this is kind of a monumental task, breaking down what I believe is over 5 hours of content. But I feel the need to do it because a lot of the important details, especially at the later end of the videos, haven't really been covered in a lot of analysis or explained videos. And a lot of the context for my theories and thoughts on this are important. But at the same time, I have to keep it concise, so we're gonna stick to what is relevant. So let's go. The first Petscop video introduces us to quite a lot. First, our protagonist, Paul. At first, it appears he's making these videos as a sort of let's play, but as it goes on, it's clear he's making them for some friend or family member specifically.
Alright, so, this is just to, prove to you that I'm not lying about this game that I found.
Spoiler, I believe that from the very beginning, it's for Belle, a character who will become important later. However, in later episodes, that changes. We'll get into that. We're introduced to the idea of what Petscop is, a Pokemon-esque game where you solve puzzles to catch pets. From the very start, there is symbolism and connection to things like the foster care system. It also introduces the concept that a lot of the puzzles in the game going forward are going to be incredibly convoluted and strange. One of the first things Paul has to do is literally glitch through a wall to catch a pet. And the last thing I want to mention here, straight from the start, is the text and dialogue in the game have a very odd tone, which will be a running theme. Petscop 1 ends with Paul reading a note that came with the game. I walked downstairs, and when I got to the bottom, instead of proceeding, I turned the right and became a shadow monster man. 6/13/97. For you. Please go to my website on the sticker and also go to Ronith's room and press start and press down, 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 right, start. Here we have the first indication that the game in part was meant for someone, and that someone is not Paul, at least not yet. So Paul inputs the cheat code in the note, and when he leaves the room he's in, he is taken to a dark, creepy area. This will be where most of the videos take place from here on. Paul finds some sort of door, but there's no real way to open it. So the video ends. Okay, that one was a little detailed because I wanted to give you a proper introduction. Let's speed this up a bit. Apparently, after just waiting for a couple hours outside the door, it opened, so Paul enters and explores a whole new part of the spooky area. Paul finds the message, "Care left the room," which seems ominous at first, but changes its meaning later, because later, as he explores, he discovers a character in the game is named Care, along with a note that shows 3 different versions of Care. Care A, Care B, and Care NLM. We'll come back to Care. While Paul explores, he also comes across a car driving by, a gravestone with the name Mike Hammond, which, as you can tell from the dates and Paul points out, is a
Dead kid.
Moving back to Care, above this character is a flower, which Paul can pluck the petals from. When he does, Care changes into probably the most directly unsettling imagery in the series. There have been a lot of connections made to this, including He Loves Me Not, and in this case it would end on Loves Me Not, and a Dr. Seuss book about a girl who grows a flower from her head and believes that no one loves her. This connection gets stronger as the series goes on, but most importantly now, the book contains the line "Nobody loves me," which is what the NLM in Care NLM is assumed to stand for. Paul also comes across something simply known as the Tool, which he can ask questions and tells him to watch the windmill. However, watching the windmill right now doesn't do much. He also finds the infamous Quitter's Room, which is a mirrored room, and Paul's player character counterpart looks like that. However, at one point their sync is messed up, giving the impression that it isn't just a mirror, but a separate in some way. In the room, there's a message, "Do you remember being born?" And that's the important stuff from 2. I do want to mention here, though, that this episode is where most of the theories about the Candace Newmaker connection theories are developed. Essentially, Candace Newmaker was a real-life child who was killed during an abusive child therapy session known as rebirthing. In the early Petscop videos, there are quite a lot of allusions to Candace Newmaker, but Tony Domenico has explained that these references are tied closer to the themes and not directly to the story being told, and that he regrets using a real-life tragedy in the story. So aside from the connections to child abuse and the childcare system, the Newmaker connection is not that important. The term rebirthing is used quite a bit in the series, though it references something completely different. Petscop 3 begins with "Good grief and alas," fitting foreshadowing for the dark things the series is in for. This episode introduces the Child Library, a puzzle where you can put together different facial features to generate a child's bedroom. Using different facial features seen throughout the environment until now, Paul is able to generate specific rooms that yield interesting results, one of which is Michael's room and another is Care's room. In Care's room there is a note. "Your wife says Care isn't growing any eyebrows. You say that's a puzzle. You're secretly very excited to hear this news. You're in the bathtub thinking about her. I have a guess at which child you'll pick next. When you find her room, the passage to my right will lead her. She'll appear from the darkness limping, and I'll shoot her in the head. Tiara says some young people can be psychologically damaged beyond rebirthing. A young person walks into your school building. They walk in with you. You're holding their hands. They come out crying into their hands because nobody will love them. Not ever again. Nobody loves me. They wander the Newmaker plane." Wowza! Petscop 4 shows Paul discovering some sort of camera, the one that looks at the windmill from the Tool room. However, where the windmill would be is just an empty plot. Here, Paul is asking the Tool more questions. He asks who is Tiara, to which it responds, "Petscop kid, very smart." That will make sense later. Then the Tool suddenly changes to a bright pink, and then the same bright pink color tells Paul to turn off the PlayStation, and that Marvin picks up Tool and hurts me when PlayStation on. It's pretty clear to me that this is not the Tool talking, but someone else speaking through the game. Petscop 6 begins after Paul has been watching the windmill for almost 3 hours. A silhouetted figure walks to the windmill, goes inside, and the windmill changes direction. Then this figure begins asking questions using blocks. "Where is my house? Where is the school? I will follow." Then the windmill disappears. Paul goes up and catches a new pet, Tonith, whose description is very strange, referencing a dog being hit by a car and never being the same even after it recovered, at least in the mind of the person writing. It was damaged beyond coming back. Paul asks the questions that this figure did to the Tool, to which the Tool responds, "You'll never go home, you can't go back in time." Petscop 6 ends with Paul stating that it seems like the game is trying to make it appear as if the game is haunted or has some AI, but he doesn't believe it actually is haunted or has an entity inside because things are too separate.
But you know, the way you know that there's a ghost in the game trying to communicate with you is if it comes out, if it stops being distant, and it comes out and you can have a real-time back and forth with it. It stops being so one way.
Keep this distinction in mind. The first thing Petscop 7 does that is important is it denotes the name Marvin to the silhouetted figure from Petscop 6. Then Paul generates a room in the child library that is Care but with Mike's eyebrows, and here he finds an object that is censored for us. But whatever it is, it seems to shake him, leading people to believe, along with other things, that this is somehow personally connecting to Paul's real-life past in the game. This is the first use of censoring in the series and begins to hint at something outside of Paul tampering tampering with the footage. Here we get a closer look at some cars we briefly saw in Petscop 2. Then the Marvin character appears and leads Paul to look at a few different images. The house, the school, and then a wall where it seems like Marvin is attempting to enter as if there was a door. Then Marvin runs away and Paul can't find him. Suddenly we jump cut to Paul talking to someone on the phone, my guess is Belle, who again we'll learn about later.
Yeah, well, the thing is, it's not here now. There's not even a passageway or anything.
Belle seems to remember the game having a passageway in that spot at one point, and Paul reveals that his mother had the game in 2004. This begins connecting Paul's personal life directly to the game even more. Here, the concept of a demo is introduced. When demo is on the screen, it means that the game is in an altered state. The term demo is probably referencing games that will show a demo of gameplay when left inactive. However, in this case, it usually means what's on screen is linked to something someone has previously done but altered. For instance, this first demo, where the character is on a treadmill and it counts down, stopping at 3 and then continuing until 0, perfectly lines up with Paul plucking the flowers in Petscop 2, pausing at pedal 3 and then going upstairs to pick the last 3. Then we're back to Paul playing normally. He glitches the game by going downstairs and turning to the right, like the note from Petscop 1 says, and becomes a silhouette, a shadow monster man. Now in this state, Paul can see the windmill. Looking back on Petscop 6, you can see that Marvin's character is in this state when he approaches the windmill as well. Next, Paul generates another room, and inside he sees another version of the player character walking out. Something to note here is that its movements perfectly replicate what Paul is going to do. It predicts it. There is the possibility that Paul just subconsciously followed the movements exactly, but I don't think that was the intention. Either way, there's another note in the room. You must have guessed, but I was looking through your things. I found that picture of you from 1977, standing in front of an old windmill with your friend. You went there and it was a bad idea. Your friend and the windmill both disappeared into thin air. Her sister was holding the camera. She took another picture minutes later, just you, no windmill, and no friend. You married her sister, and years later your friend was reborn as your daughter. Your wife won't admit this is true, but I know it because I found the evidence. Your friend never returned with you, and the windmill was gone. I went to see it myself. Where is it? What did you do? Rainer, Newmaker. And so we have our first explanation of the windmill incident. After he reads this, he continues and finds a room with a gift box, which opens and what's inside is censored. Whatever it is, it severely freaks Paul out.
What the fuck?
Then we're back to the area where Care is, and this time Paul can catch her. In her description, it says, you can turn Care NLM into Care A and close the loop. Episode 10 doesn't have a lot, but we see Paul get access to the other side of the Quitter's room, and when he asks the tool, where's the windmill, the answer is censored. Okay, so Episode 11 is almost a half hour long, so I'll try to make this concise. It's important to note that, per the description, the person running this channel is no longer Paul himself. It's a group of people known as the proprietors, although I'm fairly confident this is Paul's family. They've made a deal with Paul to keep recording the game, and they do what they want with the footage. It also seems that not every video from here on will be Paul. And as Paul talks in this video, it's clear that the game is tied directly to himself and his family.
Signs along the way, that I ignored, because it would have been a completely ridiculous idea to me. But when I found my room, it made, I was shocked at first, but it made sense. Especially considering where I found the game in the first place. They would be tied in some way to me through you. And I'm trying to think, when was the last time I saw any of you at all? It had to have been like 1999. I was a kid. I was a small kid. Tiny kid.
There's more car references, and then he finds a house decorated for Christmas. Paul seems to be on the phone with someone and references that he doesn't remember meeting this Care girl, or the fact that she went missing.
I don't remember meeting this girl at all. I just don't remember even hearing about anyone going missing.
So it's revealed that not only is Care a real person and that she's related to Paul's personal life somehow, but also that Paul doesn't remember what would have been a big deal at the time. She went missing for a period of time. This relates pretty directly to something inside the house Paul discovered. There's a calendar. I want to get this right out of the way. There are multiple calendars in this series that mean a couple of different things, so we'll just explain both, because otherwise it will get hard to keep track of. One calendar appears to show a child custody arrangement with someone slowly losing days with their child, and the other seems to be marking the days that Care was missing. There's one more thing Paul explains about himself and Care. They have the same birthday and they look eerily similar. This is the first groundwork to the theory that Paul and Care are actually the same person. It's very confusing and there's a lot more evidence as the episodes go on and different explanations, but we'll get into that later. For now, just keep in mind that Care and Paul are connected in that way. And then we see another demo, which introduces an entirely new mechanic with Marvin: speaking. You can use a second controller to input a very convoluted system to have a real-time conversation. What's interesting here is that Marvin seems to somehow know who he's talking to. Whatever AI is controlling Marvin seems advanced enough that it can type rough approximations of names and words and have a dynamic conversation with Paul, instead of just pre-written answers to specific questions like the tool. The tool will usually say, "I don't know," if asked a question that isn't explicitly implied that you should ask. But Marvin can talk right back and even have reactions to Paul messing up his spelling. We then cut back away from the demo. What's interesting is Paul doesn't speak out loud the entire demo sequence, making me believe either he wasn't set up to record or that somehow the Paul in the demo was pre-programmed in some way, or not Paul directly and instead, again, relating somehow to an altered version of Paul's gameplay. Paul then reads a note found in the house. "My husband may come here after 6 p.m. Please stay overnight if you can. Thank you so much." And after that, Paul discovers a bedroom with Care inside. However, she's protected by some invisible boundary. Paul gets stuck in a room and sees Marvin break in through the window and take Care. Paul follows suit and can catch Care. I think you can begin to see what story is being told here. Marvin, the real-life one, is Care, the real-life one's dad. He lost custody of her and kidnapped her, taking her to a school basement, and that is when she went missing. And when she came back from being missing, there was no longer a regular Care or a Care A. She was traumatized. Care NLM. What caused this trauma? Remember how in the windmill message it said that Marvin believed his childhood friend had been reborn into his daughter? I think Marvin tried in some way to rebirth his friend through Care. What exactly that entails might become more clear in a moment. Moving on. Care's A description is a message from Rainer, aka the supposed creator of Petscop, and flat out says that he created the game for Marvin initially, but now is giving it as a gift to the whole family on Christmas. The "check your bathroom" line is particularly ominous to me, but again we'll talk about it later. Another demo sequence. Marvin asks Paul to play music on the Needles piano. He does, and Marvin seems happy about it until Paul messes up and Marvin says to stop. Marvin says, "Tiara plays bad music too. I think this music has something to do with the rebirthing process." Wow, that was a long one. This one also starts as a demo sequence, and a sequence of messages appear for Belle, someone who I've briefly mentioned before. So whatever this area or part of the game is, it's for Belle, not Paul or Marvin. It says Belle is free and that she's been running the game nonstop for a sum of 17 years. Then some more cryptic text. "Can you still look around the room? Is there still a room?" I assume it's referring to the room that Belle has been in playing Petscop. This text also specifically points out that Belle is not family. So she's not related to Marvin or Paul or Care, but she is important enough to have her own section of the game. Then it says this weirdness. "I'm calling you Belle because that's who you are. I was overeager before and started calling you Tiara prematurely. I put you inside the machine and played the second movement of Stravinsky's septet on the Needles. If you hadn't given up halfway, you would be Tiara." So this Tiara character is Belle, and to me, it's clear that Marvin somehow tried to rebirth Belle into Tiara, but failed because she plays bad music. But again, that's very confusing for now, and we're only halfway through. Another demo, but this time Paul is narrating over it. He seems to be working on a slightly convoluted puzzle with buckets, and catches another pet. As we'll see later though, this might not be exactly what Paul sees, and I'll explain that when we get there. For now, just remember this message at the end. Leave the PlayStation on when you leave. This one starts as a demo where we get a sort of similar concept to the windmill incident. Two photos of a door are taken seconds apart. In one photo the door is closed, in another it's open. The door was not opened by anyone and did not open itself. In fact, the door isn't open at all. So how are the photos different? This relates directly to the puzzle that Paul must solve after. Here, Paul narrates over a demo. Essentially, the way he must solve this puzzle is by, in the regular game, pretending that this door is open. So he has to put in the button presses to navigate past the door and through the rooms. In the demo, which is an altered version of the game he played, and can presumably watch back, he can see what is behind the door, because in that version, the door is open, so his key presses will actually move him through. Paul also says the phrase,
I assume it will be up on the family YouTube along with this video that I'm recording right now,
which partially confirms my suspicion that the people who took over Paul's channel is his family. There are two other important things to note here. Number one is just how long Paul has been playing. and the other is how convoluted the puzzles are. How would he even know to do some of this stuff? He suggested that he attempted this section dozens of times. Paul is either obsessed or being sort of forced to continue. After completing this strange puzzle, the game resets and opens again, this time with the opening splash screen, which says Garalina, being tilted strangely. This signifies an altered state of the game in my mind, but also brought something else up. The first time we see Garalina's splash logo, it's completely vertical. Is it possible that the game has been off-kilter from its default state since the beginning? In any case, this new version of the game only has one save file, Strange Situation, which is another real-life reference to childcare, specifically research, but that's not super important. Paul enters a room decorated for a birthday, and dialogue boxes pop up with things like, "Why are you covering your face? Of course I recognize you," and "Care, you ran straight into the door. Did you think it was open?" To me, this is a direct reference to the door puzzle from earlier. Then another conversation ensues, and it gets somehow even stranger. "Where is the disc? Where are the discovery pages? What are you talking about? Jill, stop fucking ignoring me. Show me where that disc is. Care, this is mommy. This is your mommy. I'm right in front of you. There's no one else here. What are you looking at? What's over there?" Paul goes on to say that somehow that text is based on a conversation he had on his birthday the previous year. So somehow the game has changed and updated to include that. Then the game crashes, and when Paul reboots it, he finds a computer that has a website, which Paul calls the website. Presumably the website that was referenced in the note that came with the game. It's hard to make out, but I'm pretty sure the website is titled Petscop Discovery Pages. Make of that what you will. This website was never made available to the public. Petscop 14 ends with Paul walking into a room, a black sensor bar appearing, and Paul saying,
"Fuck."
There's some debate over whether whatever is in the text box is being censored and it has thoroughly freaked Paul out, or if it's just the game crashing before the text can load in. This is another demo and gives us some revelations. First, we learn that this character from Quitter's Room in episode 2 is Belle/Tiara, not only doubling down on the Tiara-Belle connection, but also showing that Belle is somehow important enough that she was placed as an in-game character with Marvin. Tiara tells the player to press Nifty, which opens up a menu that can edit textures in the game in real time. To me, this confirms that when the tool changed to pink and started saying to turn the PlayStation off, it was the in-game Tiara character communicating with the player by editing the textures. Petscop 16 is probably the most unsettling in the series. We just get this warning. No controller input has been detected for a long time. Family, neighbors, police, or whoever, keep game console running. Call provided number. The number is censored. Intermittently, it will fade to a map that seems to be tracking someone in a room, with the text ghost room/testing room. This is getting fucking crazy. This one starts with a sound test screen, where whoever is playing seems to be inputting some kind of code. When the code is put in, we can see an assortment of recordings that have been saved. Note, these are different from Paul's recordings, as these are saved directly onto the disc and are presumably from many years ago. In these recordings, we can see various what seem like unfinished character sprites doing random movements throughout the house level. Many people have speculated that these are AI running through hundreds of tests similar to machine learning. We then focus on one who walks backwards as we get this crazy exposition dump. It seems like the text is referring to Care, aka, as we're about to learn, Carrie Mark. The family is wondering what happened to her on November 11th, 1997. This was the day between Care escaping from Marvin's captivity and when she got home. There was a day where no one knew where she was. The family wants to know where she was. Then the dialogue says, "Have these statements always been true? Or have I cursed you? Is there such a thing? A curse that changes your past?" After she escaped the school basement where she was being held by Marvin, she wandered, her movements not making sense, bumping into walls and doors, dodging invisible obstacles. It's then revealed that the girl who went missing with the windmill is named Lena Leskowitz, and her gravestone reads, "They didn't see her." This one is very short and contains some images of game assets. I'm sure some other people can figure out its relevance, but for now, that's all I really have to say about it. This is a series of recordings that are presumably the game in various stages of development, with different people playing depending on the recording. The big thing to note here for me is the fact that Belle is in one of these recordings and is the only one who is actually solving the puzzles. It will connect with some of Paul's dialogue later, and it connects to the sentence from way earlier from the tool, "Petscop kid, very smart." This is a recording of Marvin playing. When the game starts, the Garalina logo is tilted even more, leading me to believe that this is a different state of the game than any other we've seen so far. Also worth noting that the left and right are swapped on the controller, and there is no quit button in this version. Many have made the connections to the left and right being related to Paul in a much earlier video saying he gets his right and left confused. Well, I think that's valid and probably true. I think it's more directly related to the mirrored world motif that has been showing up from the demo sequences in the Quitter's room. In this recording, Raynor speaks directly to Marvin again. Marvin eventually stumbles upon a room with various objects inside, labeled caskets. Because of their shape, it's pretty well accepted that these are the things that have been censored thus far. The most important one, to me, is the red vase, because of the text it prompts. You showed Kara her red, blurry reflection in the vase. You said, "Do you see that? Look at how ugly you are now." Kara squinted her eyes. The reflection wasn't clear at all, but as you began to describe her grisly deformities, she began to see them. "Nobody wants to see you like this," you said. To me, this is very clearly Raynor explaining the mental trauma Marvin put his daughter, Kara, through while he kidnapped her. This is what made Kara believe that nobody loves her. It's also worth mentioning the flower references pretty directly back to the flower from Petscop 2 and the Dr. Seuss book I mentioned. This is my favorite. This is another disc recording titled Care Dancing Sign. At first, it just seems like 3 minutes of random movements. However, if you sync this video to the song The Sign by Ace of Base, you can see that it's actually Care dancing to that song. This part was originally going to have a MIDI version of that song that I created so that you could see that it lined up, but YouTube copyright claimed my MIDI song. So fuck you, YouTube, but sorry, this is what you guys get. Seems pretty harmless and goofy, and that's why it's my favorite, because it adds a level of humanity to the character of Care. She's really just a kid, and this type of thing is what a kid would do. Too many pieces of media fall into the FNAF trap, where victims of some evil are just another number to be punched into an equation that will somehow solve the story. This takes a moment to remind you that there are people behind all of this. For this one, we're thrown right into the middle of a phone call between Paul and Belle. I believe it takes place directly after Petscop 10. There's some censored text we can't see, but I assume it's coordinates because of the context of the conversation. Paul asks the tool, "Where was the windmill?" and it gives him these numbers. The conversation they're having is about somehow converting in-game distance units to feet or meters so that they can find some location based on the game. The dialogue here is really great. I can't help but get excited listening to it because Paul seems to be legitimately excited. It feels like discovering something crazy with a close friend, solving some mystery. It feels genuine and full of real excitement.
I tried "Where was the windmill?" and that's how I got the text. I know, me too. That was what, the first thought. It's unlikely. This is already pretty... It's exciting.
Paul also says, "I need your puzzle genius" in this conversation, which doubly references the Belle Tiara being good at puzzles in this game. It's worth mentioning that Paul specifically mentions that he's hiding his discoveries from the family because they intimidate him, specifically his Aunt Jill.
This is why I'm not telling the family, because it's exciting. They don't know much more than we do now. I don't like talking to them. They intimidate me. And I'm sure they wouldn't intimidate you at all. Hey, have they called you? They haven't called you, right? I mean, Jill specifically. No, you don't want her calling you anyway. Like, you won't be able to escape if that's the thing, if she were to start.
Clearly, his setup with the Petscop channel is not ideal. Paul also seems to be in a car while playing and lies to Belle about it. I literally have absolutely no idea why. Anyway, as he talks, he's hit by a car in-game. This is surprising because the cars beforehand have specifically avoided him. And then the Tiara/Belle in-game character walks on screen. And when she does, Belle over the phone stops responding.
You there? Belle, you there?
Remembering that Belle and Tiara are connected, it's crazy, eerie, but also, what? We'll talk about the questions later. Seriously, I know I keep putting these off, but I have a whole section of the video dedicated to talking about these, so just hang tight. The Tiara game character motions to the right, and this tense moment between Paul and this character is legitimately unnerving. Paul is clearly losing his patience with the game, and it's just really creepy seeing his obsession with the game taking its toll as the confusing and creepy face just keeps pointing him in one direction. We're brought to a strange level with text on screen that seems to be coming from the perspective of a student counselor, judging by the title of the background music during this section. The counselor apologizes for pulling the reader, I assume this is either about Kara or Belle, out of class, and offers to play a game with them. After playing a strange minigame called Grave Robbers, there's some more passing dialogue and the video ends. While there is one more video after this, Petscop 23 is essentially the finale, so buckle up. This one starts as another demo, walking around this strange 3D school area. Then the character, presumably Paul, although he doesn't narrate any of this, walks into a classroom area and Marvin is there. Marvin asks what room Paul is in, and then Paul must select from various bedroom layouts that look similar to the one shown in Petscop 16. Paul chooses the one from Petscop 16, and Marvin says, "Here I come." Paul begins typing but is then cut off. It's fucking freaky watching this for the first time, I'm not gonna lie. It just fills you with dread. My immediate thought here is that this is somehow given the real life Marvin some information about where the real life Paul is, and Marvin has gotten up to see him in real life. That's why Paul suddenly stops typing. That's just my first thought that comes to mind though. After a cut, we see Marvin's character walk away, and Tiara/Belle walks in and says sorry. Paul asks for help, and Tiara leads him to the chalkboard where she's edited the texture to give him a code, which works on a locker in another part of the school. Inside the locker is a purple and pink Easter egg and a note. "Your new life letter, Tiara Leskowitz." The text itself is a little confusing and jumbled, but it seems to be a slightly emotionally unstable mother essentially writing, "I love you and will miss you while you're at school." Paul then wanders to a basement, the basement of the school. If this seems significant to you, it should. Remember, Marvin was said to have kidnapped Care and kept her in the school basement. This is the first time we've seen it. Paul drops various items into a pit until a door opens. Inside, he finds and captures Care B. I think it's pretty clear the message being conveyed here, especially after reading Care B's description. Care A is Care before she was kidnapped, a happy-go-lucky child. Care B is her when she was kidnapped, alone and afraid. And Care NLM is after she's escaped and Marvin has convinced her that nobody will love her. Paul finally enters a room with Marvin and Tiara, and Marvin instructs him to put Care inside of some sort of machine, and then play a song on the needles. When Paul begins playing though, Marvin tells him to stop. It seems like this is not the song Marvin wanted. In my mind, this is obviously the rebirthing process. As we've seen before with Tiara, the music is important. And this isn't just Paul messing around, he's playing something specific as if to get a different goal, one that Marvin does not like. In the captions, the song is titled Paul's Theme. Marvin eventually leaves, and then Paul opens the machine and finds Care has turned into a red and yellow Easter egg with no name. He caches it, and the description is simply, "? You should start thinking about that." I take this to mean that Rainer, the creator of the game, was leaving a message to himself because the item wasn't finished. Paul leaves the room and goes to the locker again and places the new egg with the one already in the locker. He leaves the school, and then a pre-rendered image of a computer at a desk in a room that is missing a wall revealing the outside appears, before Petscop boots to menu. The end.
Bye-bye.
Petscop 24 is essentially a credit sequence showing what seems to be all of the Petscop kids, the kids who playtested Petscop and are shown in some of those recordings in Petscop 19. The credits end as essentially a birthday card to Michael. If you'll remember, Michael was that dead kid from all those episodes ago. It's from Anna, Michael's aunt and Care's mother. Sorry if I didn't mention her name until now. It was vaguely brought up a few times. It's very hard to keep track of things. What's especially interesting is this. Michael died when he was 7. This is his 7th birthday. The message on Michael's grave was, "Mike was a gift." Food for thought. And so that's the end of Petscop 1 to 24. There's one more video on the channel, but that's just the soundtrack. There hasn't been another canon upload to Petscop since September 1st, 2019. So this is what we've got to work with. Holy fucking shit. Let's go. Alright, there's no way I can possibly cover every single question in Petscop, but I want to talk about the ones that seem most significant to me and seemed like I might be able to give satisfactory answers to them. Question 1. Are Paul and Care the same person? And if so, how? There are a lot of different theories and interpretations of exactly their connections, but I would say that in some way, yes, they are the same. Not only are they exactly the same age and look very similar, but Care also seems to literally say things that Paul himself admits he said. As well, when Paul creates Care's room with eyebrows in the child library, he refers to it as his room. And the cherry on top is that if Care is so closely related to Paul's family, it seems strange he never would have met her unless he is her. So yes, I'd say it's pretty clear that Paul is Care in one form or another. One explanation that is becoming increasingly popular is that Paul is a trans man. This is a completely valid interpretation that definitely requires less suspension of disbelief than something like merging timelines, but there are some issues with this. Number one is what some trans fans have actually had to say about it. This theory seems to lack intent from the creator, and so certain aspects or explorations that might exist in a work inherent to the trans experience are missing. It is quite a tired trope to include trans representation, but only through vague metaphor or a need for an audience to piece it together instead of just, real representation. To some fans, this has been a great lens to view the story through, especially with some of its themes of families not accepting their children and rebirthing have been a great way to relate to certain personal experiences. So while I think this is a completely valid lens to see the story through, I tend to also agree that number one, we should expect more transparent representation, and also that it lacks the intent, and I think another explanation ties in with some other themes. But before we get into my personal explanation of choice, let's talk about a couple other possible answers. One is that Care is Paul's twin. There are some holes in this one, but considering the explicit references to family estrangement with Paul, I don't think it's too far-fetched. Another theory that I have some issues with is that the idea that Paul was born a biological male, but was forced by Marvin to present as a girl for his early life because Marvin wanted to rebirth his childhood friend, a woman, through Paul. While this makes sense on the surface, again, there's a lot missing in the way of author's intent, and that sort of trope is too marred in transphobic history for me to want to entertain it if I don't explicitly think that that's what Tony Domenico was trying to do. Again, it's a valid interpretation that does fit with certain aspects of the story, but I don't think it holds water. So what is the answer? Well, in my view, it's the opposite of Occam's razor. Normally, you want the simplest answer, but looking at the other themes pushed so hard in this series, I think it just makes the most sense story-wise and thematically. Paul and Care are the same people from slightly altered timelines that are converging, and they sometimes go in and out of experiencing each other's lives. And I think the game, Petscop, is somehow a conduit between these timelines. I know that's a lot to digest, but let me throw some of these things out there. First, remember the conversation that Paul believes is based on a conversation he had on his last birthday? Where is the disc? Where are the discovery pages? What are you talking about? Jill, stop fucking ignoring me, show me where that disc is. Care, this is mommy, this is your mommy, I'm right here in front of you, there's no one else here. What are you looking at? What's over there? This is Care in the 90s speaking Paul's side of a conversation that wouldn't happen until 2017. Paul is clearly talking to his Aunt Jill about the game, about Petscop. Meanwhile, Care's mother is watching confused as Care yells at what seems like nobody, acting as though she is talking to someone. There's also references to Care's movements not making any sense, dodging invisible obstacles and bumping into walls. They even make explicit reference to walking into a door, thinking it was open. Well, when you realize that this is a direct reference to the door puzzle that Paul has to solve, where the two altered versions of the game have a door open and then one closed, and Paul has to play through his reality of the game as if it were open, the idea of two merging realities begins to look like it might not just be a product of the game. There are other instances of ideas of merging realities, but I want to save those for a different question, so let's move on to another. What was the windmill incident? I didn't really focus on it as much, but the windmill incident is one of the biggest unexplained mysteries of Petscop that has haunted the community since it was first detailed in Petscop 9. I found that picture of you from 1977 standing in front of an old windmill with your friend. You went there and it was a bad idea. Your friend and the windmill both disappeared into thin air. Her sister was holding the camera. She took another picture minutes later, just you, no windmill, and no friend. Whatever happened here is what kickstarted Marvin's attempt to rebirth his childhood friend. Some people believe that the windmill didn't actually disappear and that the photo was just taken from a different angle. Some people think that Marvin killed his friend, and other people think that she just disappeared. Lena, Marvin's friend who went missing, on her headstone has the phrase, "they didn't see her." Along with the motif of cars and car crashes, some people think Lena was hit by a car. And one of my first thoughts when seeing the windmill imagery was the Don Quixote story. The windmill is somehow symbolic of an invisible enemy or Marvin's impossible goal. But as I continued, while I think the windmill was chosen for that symbolic purpose, I think there's more going on here. For me, I think the windmill is the very inception of every part of this story, not just Marvin's journey into madness and motivation to rebirth Lena, but also this whole dimensional merging thing I was explaining earlier. We've established that things can change in physical space between the two timelines, with doors and even people. I don't think that the windmill disappearing was somehow a metaphor or riddle. It really did disappear. I think Lena and the windmill disappearing was the first effect or change that the merging timeline had. The parallels are just too close with the door puzzle, note that the windmill is right next to this explanation of the door riddle, and especially with Paul changing into this shadow monster man, changing his dimension and being able to see the windmill. It's a very clear connection being made in Petscop with different realities changing space, perception, and even people. And the windmill seems to be an obviously important event that I can't reasonably assume that that's not what's happening. For one reason or another, the two parallel universes begin colliding, and this is the first effects of that. Who made Petscop? This question is a lot more straightforward, but there were some things I wasn't able to expand upon enough before, so I just want to talk about that now. Rainer is the creator of Petscop, the one leaving the messages for Marvin. It didn't start that way, though. This little story I'm about to tell is generally what's accepted and explained in the community, so I won't get into all the weird details that brought us to this conclusion because it's pretty straightforward. Rainer's real name is Daniel. He's Paul's cousin. Daniel's younger brother is Michael, the dead kid. The game was made as a gift of sorts for Michael, at least in part. However, something happened to Michael. Some people believe he really did die, and some people think due to the recurring thoughts from Rainer about people being beyond rebirthing, he was just never the same, so the old Michael died. And considering it's suggested multiple times through Petscop that Marvin attempted this rebirthing ritual on more children than just Care, it's likely whatever happened was because of Marvin, causing Rainer to create this game for Marvin, to confront him or expose his crimes or maybe just to get information out of him. This leads us to the next big question. What happened to Rainer? Rainer's last message makes it clear that he eventually left the game to the family, meaning eventually it wasn't just for Marvin, but a sort of spite creation for his fucked up family. Rainer ending with the line, "check your bathroom," along with a previous anecdote about wanting a dog to be put down because it was never the same after it recovered from an accident. I feel that Rainer's nihilistic worldview and anger, along with the loss of his brother, drove him to kill himself. I think what the family found when they checked that bathroom was Rainer's body. I'm sure there are more interpretations for that though, considering I'm mostly basing this on a judge of character and not necessarily because anything explicitly suggests that. Are Tiara and Belle the same? It's pretty clear that in the real world, Belle goes by Belle, but in the game, this character calls herself Tiara while Marvin calls her Belle. Along with the dialogue about giving up and not being Tiara, I think Marvin tried to rebirth Belle into Tiara to make her a part of the family. There are many times when it's made explicitly clear that Belle is not family, but she wants to be. This was Marvin's attempt to do that, but something happened and the rebirth failed. What really gets me is the fact that when Tiara shows up on the screen in Petscop 22, Belle stops responding over the phone. I think that Tiara is the in-game Belle and Belle is the real-life Tiara. But again, physics and reality don't quite work regularly in the Petscop universe, so they are somehow connected. Like somehow Belle can go into the game? Keep in mind that part in Belle's section where it asks, is there still a room? There's something there that I'm just not smart enough to completely explain, which moves us on to our next question. Is there an entity in the game? This has been a big question for a while. Was everything put there and designed by Rainer, or is it haunted in some way? Well, yes and no. I don't think it's haunted by a ghost, and I think Rainer was very specific in what he put in the game. But there is a self-aware entity in the game, and I am almost 100% sure about this one. Paul first brings up this idea that there could be an entity in the game in Petscop 6, but dismisses the idea because of this. The way you know there's a ghost in a game trying to communicate with you is if it comes out and stops being distant, if you can have a real-time back and forth with it. That is a very important distinction, and up to that point, there wasn't anything that couldn't reasonably be explained as a strange game development choice. But in Petscop 11, Marvin introduces exactly that real-time communication. Marvin's in-game character walks right in and literally talks to him. He stops being distant. This dialogue system means they can literally have that real-time back and forth. I think Paul's distinction in Petscop 6 was very purposefully to set this up. Clearly, something being inside the game is implied. So is it Marvin's ghost? I don't think so. What most people assume, and I'm inclined to agree because I don't have a better explanation, is that it's an AI created by watching and learning from how Marvin played the game. That's what all those characters running around in Petscop 17 were. The AI running through tons of tests, learning how to replicate Marvin. And I assume something similar happened with Tiara/Belle. One question I don't have an answer to is how these AI are connected to real life. Again, when Tiara appears on screen, Belle stops responding, making me feel like somehow she entered the game. And when Paul shows Marvin what room he's in, Marvin says, "Here I come," and then they both stand still as if something is happening in real life. Maybe it's more side effects of this dimensional merge, and Petscop being a strange conduit for it. Maybe Marvin and Tiara have copies of Petscop and it's somehow multiplayer. We'll get into more of the dimensional merge as a standalone subject in a minute, but first let's talk about another big question. What is rebirth? We know that Marvin seems to conduct this rebirth ritual on children, specifically Care, Belle, and possibly Michael, in order to bring his childhood friend Lena back through them, or in Belle's case, make her into Tiara and somehow make her family. But what this process actually is? Well, it's left kind of vague, but we know this. Marvin takes the children to the basement of an abandoned school. He berates them and convinces them that nobody wants them the way they are. Nobody will love them, and so they must become someone else. And then he plays some music on the Needles piano, probably the Stravinsky's septet, and through some process, I don't think it's a literal machine like in the game, they're supposed to come out new. Now the question becomes, if we're to believe that a dimensional merge is possible, do we think that the rebirthing actually works somehow? Personally, no. I think it's very important to the themes of this story that Marvin's attempt to bring Lena back are fruitless and baseless. Again, why I think they chose the windmill imagery. This goal is all in Marvin's mind. It was never going to work. Okay, what the fuck is the dimensional merge? Finally, we can talk a bit more about the root of this whole theory. I just think it was important to answer those other questions before and ease us into this idea. Now, what's tricky about this is that I think the rules of this timeline merge are left vague on purpose. It's used as a device to explore the larger themes of childhood and trauma, so to be honest, I don't think there are clearly defined rules, but I can give some further evidence that I think points to the story revolving around two similar but slightly different universes colliding. Think back to Petscop 17. As the exposition is being given about Care's past, the dialogue interrupts itself. Have these statements always been true, or have I cursed you? Is there such a thing, a curse that changes your past? Something similar is said in Petscop 14, after Paul realizes that part of a conversation he had in 2017 was somehow in the game. Paul says he looked up if someone could have tampered with the game, and the answer was, some things can't be rewritten. This is very specific sentence structure. Firstly, to me, it reinforces that Care was predicting something that Paul would say later. Rayner put all that dialogue in all the way back in 1997. Nobody added it later, meaning that Care did say all of that in 1997 or before, and no one added it to mess with Paul. But it also uses the term rewrite specifically, in vague reference to the idea that while things can change as the timelines merge, some things will always stay the same. Certain events can't be avoided. And this aspect of Petscop predicting the future is not a one-off. Recall, in Petscop 9, we see a strange character perfectly predict Paul's movements before they happen. Also remember, Petscop 14 is the very same episode where Care is explained to run into a door thinking it was open. All of these things connect very directly to the clear concepts in the game. Two dimensions, slightly different from each other, converging, dynamically changing the story. While all of these things connect and support this idea, I think the most damning is definitely the door. Linking Care walking into a door because she thought it was open directly with the in-game two game states door puzzle gives a direct connection to the alternate realities in-game and the real world. And I think somehow Petscop is a conduit these connections can be seen through. Maybe that's how Marvin and Tiara are directly connected to the in-game world through their real-world counterparts. Again, I don't know the exact rules of how this works, but I don't think that's what's important necessarily. It also begs the question, did Rayner know about the dimensional merge and design the game specifically for it? Or is the game in some way a byproduct of this merge? Honestly, I don't know. I have to think Rayner knew something. I'll expand a bit more on that with the answer to this next question. Who is watching Paul and why? We know that someone, most likely Paul's own family, took over the Petscop channel fairly early on. We also know that Paul is not particularly happy about their arrangement and is intimidated by the family. In Petscop 16, we see that someone is tracking Paul as he plays the game, as well as warning him not to turn the PlayStation off. This theme of keeping the PlayStation on keeps popping up, with Tiara using the tool to tell Paul to turn it off, and Belle's section saying it was supposedly on for 17 years. My thought is that the family clearly knows something is going on. Maybe not that there's a dimensional merge, but something with reality is messed up. Rayner left the game to them as a gift and then killed himself, and the puzzles inside are so confusing, they're taking advantage of Paul to solve it for them. They know there is something special about Paul, maybe his obsessiveness, maybe his connection with Care. They also know, although they're both estranged from the family, that Paul is still in close contact with Belle, who had the puzzle genius to solve puzzles in the game in the first place. And to me, that's the more important story. Paul is our protagonist, and so what happens to him is what we're following. We only see snippets and out-of-context dialogue from the game, telling the story that even Paul doesn't fully understand. But we have a direct line to what Paul is thinking, how he's doing. That's who this story is about. And I'll expand on that after we get to the last question I want to cover. What is Paul and Belle's fate? In Petscop 23, despite being essentially the finale, it leaves us not really knowing exactly how to feel. We know Marvin is a villain in some capacity, obviously, kidnapping and traumatizing these children, so when he gets upset and leaves, presumably his plan is thwarted. There's also a sense of togetherness when Paul takes Care's egg and places it with what seems like Tiara's egg, like somehow there's a sense of closure there. But what about the actual Paul and Belle? Well, I think of it this way. Paul has been in this room playing Petscop for who knows how long, with the family tracking him, keeping the PlayStation on at all times. Tiara from the very beginning tried to save Paul, telling him to just turn it off. So the fact that there were no more videos from Paul and the last frame we see is an empty computer desk with a wall open to the outside world makes me think they didn't just thwart Marvin's plan, but that of the family as well. Paul turned off the PlayStation. He left his family trauma behind. The real bad ending would be if Paul just kept playing forever, letting his past hold its grip on him. But instead, Paul moves on, and it seems like Belle probably does too. That's my thoughts on the ending anyway. There are still so many questions that I don't have the answers to or any idea close. Like Anna's letter at the end of Petscop 24 that alludes to Michael's death? Did Anna kill Michael? I literally have no idea. But those are some of the bigger thoughts and ideas I had. Like I promised at the beginning of this video, I do want to tell an actual concise, full story from Petscop. There is a real story being told here. It isn't all just written in metaphor. So with all of that evidence and explanation out of the way, let's talk about what my interpretation of the story being told here is. In 1977, Lena Leskowitz suddenly disappeared along with a windmill. This was the first of many strange phenomenon that would occur because of an unexplained merging of very similar but altered timelines. It would also begin a cycle of trauma that would last decades. Lena's friend, Marvin, went on to marry Lena's sister, and they had a child named Care. Marvin believed that Care was somehow going to be the reincarnated version of Lena. Marvin's strange behavior eventually led to a divorce and a slow loss of custody over Care. In 1995, Marvin kidnaps and attempts to rebirth Lena through his nephew, Michael. In the process, Michael dies. This begins Michael's brother, Daniel aka Rainer, on his quest to turn Petscop, a game he's been developing, into some sort of revenge project for Marvin. Marvin also tries at some point to rebirth Care's friend Belle into Tiara, a version of Belle who will be a part of the family, but that doesn't work. In 1997, Marvin kidnaps Care from her home and brings her to the abandoned school basement where he attempts to rebirth Lena through her. Again, this does not work, and after a while, Care escapes, now traumatized by Marvin. Rainer adds more to his game. When Care escaped, she was not her old self anymore, and so the merge started affecting things even more. Paul, Anna and Marvin's child from the other timeline, begins converging with Care. Care starts seeing the world as Paul, sometimes seeing things that will happen in the future. Her reality she perceives is slightly different. She sees doors open that are closed. She sees obstacles that aren't there. History slowly begins to rewrite itself. Rainer finishes Petscop, leaving AI versions of Marvin and Tiara inside, and gives it to the family as a gift on Christmas before killing himself. Obsessed with the cycle or loop of trauma their family has been through, and determined to solve what strange mysteries lie in the game that might explain the odd events that have plagued them, the rest of the family begins trying to crack the code. Meanwhile, Paul/Care, who I'll now refer to as Paul as their characters slowly morph into each other as the realities merge, becomes estranged from the family, possibly even being adopted by the Leskowitzes, as evidenced by Paul's Reddit account being P.A. Leskowitz. He tries to leave this strange, tangled past behind, and Belle seems to do the same, but the family eventually realize the only two people who could solve this are Paul, one of the most directly affected by these strange circumstances, and seems to have forgotten most of his past, and Belle, who has the smarts to solve the puzzles inside. So they give Paul the game, get him hooked, and draw him back into the twisted cycle of trauma. They monitor him and push him to continue following the path the game has set. There are arguments, and Paul doesn't seem very happy about this arrangement, but they have him hooked. But finally, Paul and Belle decide to put a stop to it when, instead of following the directions and perpetuating the cycle, they close the loop. Paul plays a different song and puts Belle and himself, aka Tiara and Care, together. Then, Paul turns off the PlayStation. He stops entertaining the game's puzzle and leaves his past behind. He closes the loop. So that's my interpretation of the events of Petscop. Like I said way in the beginning, I'm sure there are plenty of holes with this theory that people could poke in, and that some people will have differing or even combative opinions about what the story being told here is. If you want some other opinions, I'd suggest checking out Nightmare Masterclass's video, Game Theory's video, and then I have no idea how to pronounce this, it's probably a really common word, and I'm just stupid. Game Theory focuses in more on the AI stuff, and Nightmare Masterclass talks about what some of the themes and societal messages might be in Petscop. And then the person I can't pronounce, gives a more grounded interpretation of events that is a little more realistic than, alternate timelines converging. And please, feel free to poke holes in my theory. I know I didn't cover everything, and I really find the discourse around the Petscop theory community really interesting. One thing that is very clear to me, though, is what Petscop is saying thematically. So now I want to talk a little bit about what this whole story is trying to say. Petscop covers so many intertwining angles. Childhood, trauma, family drama, the foster care system, the child care system, rebirth, murder. But I think the most important thing here is your past. In my mind, the exact logistics of these two timelines converging aren't very important because they're being used as a device to explore Paul's relationship with his family and childhood. Care in that timeline is his childhood. He was a different person in a completely different state of mind, and the trauma he's experienced caused him to push it all down. He was reborn in a way. And then his family draws him back into the same childhood trauma, that same cycle that left him scarred in the beginning. It explicitly tells him, "You are Carrie Mark," his old self, drawing him back. His family essentially kidnaps him. The game forces him to relive the same family trauma from his childhood. The two realities are Paul's past interacting with his present thematically. It's also very much a story about found family. Although the game does give him some closure going against what Marvin, his abuser, wants, the real way he escapes is just by leaving it all behind. Remember, Rainer is complicit in all this too. His creation of the game perpetuates the cycle as well. Belle is closer to family than anyone else. Paul and Belle actually care about each other, so they have to just cut ties with their past and move on. There are other less integral themes and concepts that I think are really interesting. One of those is liminality, which I made a whole video on a while back. For anyone who hasn't seen it, liminal space is defined as a space between two states. That can be literal, like a hallway or an airport, or physical, like the state of childhood or being between two jobs. Much of the game gives the same vibes as these liminal space photos, but the theme goes deeper. It follows childhood. Hell, the game itself always feels like it's in between two states. And Paul himself, while playing the game, is in a liminal space between his past and present. He's in a strange spot of reliving it and not being able to move on. And I do think there's something to be said about the Don Quixote reference. Marvin's pursuit of the impossible goal, which later evolves into the family's impossible goal of solving the mystery of the game. Their vision is clouded, and they're stuck in that loop because they keep making the same mistakes. They're chasing windmills. Which at times is what it feels like trying to solve Petscop's story, so maybe that should be telling me something. Okay, one last thing I want to talk about here is the community that is built around Petscop. See, I used to be a really invested member of the Five Nights at Freddy's theory community, but it seems largely in present FNAF, that whole aspect has not been the focus anymore. The focus of the subreddit and Steam community pages used to be so focused on what each new thing meant. Watching a FNAF game theory led me through all these cool epiphanies. It felt like solving something. And talking to my friends about our theories really felt like Paul and Belle talking about the coordinates, which I think is why that part connected with me so much. But like I said, I haven't really felt that way about something in a long while. I think that's really why people connected with all the FNAF VHS stuff a couple years ago, and people liked my videos theorizing about it. That felt really great, but even that eventually got a little repetitive. But looking at Petscop gave me a feeling I haven't had in probably 5 years with those first 3 or 4 FNAF games. Even the Walton Files, which is absolutely fantastic, comes along with some of the expectations of the FNAF VHS format, although it does a great job at raising the bar. But Petscop, I had literally no idea what to expect, except for vague memories of EXE stories and Ben Drowned from like a decade ago. But it makes sense why such a huge community built around it. Also, I think it's worth mentioning, there was never and will never be an official version of Petscop to play. Tony Domenico has said as much, probably because of so much of it is built around specific scenes he needed to set up, but there is a fantastic community project called Giftscop, which has recreated the game to a crazy level of accuracy, and I'd suggest you go support it because it's a wild experience. It really feels like just booting up Petscop. And lastly, what's Tony Domenico up to now? Well, he's working on something new, but being very secretive about it. Believe it or not, although you probably will believe it, because, of course, he actually has a background in making indie games, although nothing ever got as big as Petscop. This is his Twitter. I really suggest following it in case you want updates. Although it's mostly just really weird and funny tweets. He seems like a very strange fellow. So, if you want updates about what's going on with his projects, you can follow him there. All right, that's what I got to say about Petscop. Dear God, this was a long one. It was almost 40 pages, and I just finished doing the voiceover section, and that was like an hour of voiceover, so yeah, this is gonna be a big one. Either way, please leave your theories and thoughts about Petscop in the comments, because I would love to see them. I'll probably be looking through the comments of this video for hours after it comes out. Also, definitely shout out to Game Theory, Nightmare Masterclass, and their videos helped out a ton in my understanding of the series. Again, my second channel has some stream highlights of the stream I did watching Petscop with you guys, and if you want to catch my next stream, you can follow my Twitter, where I announce when I'm streaming at twitch.tv/SaganHawks. See you all next time.